Hello and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I just have to do the little Facebook thing. I really should be on Ustream and I don't because I've been lazy. And also technology kind of scares me, but I can admit that. So 1 second while I pull up here and see what we're doing. Okay, it says I am live. We're going to share, hit the copy button, and then we're going to go right over here to this Book of Faces and click here. Join me live for story time. Hello, Matthew. Good to see you. Thank you very much. I'm not wearing a jacket and I'm not wearing very much jewelry. Maybe I was a little lazy. I don't know. I have to wait for it to do its little cycle thing. And then when it comes through, there we go, and hit the post button. And then we have to go over to the Gentleman Psychic page and do the same thing. Let's see. Here's the clock. Join me live for story time. And then we're going to go here and we hit the paste button and we hit the publish. Oh, good. Okay, so we'll let everyone have a moment to sort of filter in, to get relaxed, to get a drink if you like, to get a blanket, to... Ooh, 1 second. I plugged in the phone and it threw everything off, but there we go. So glad to have everyone here. Happy Earth Day, by the way. Every day should be Earth Day. So happy Earth Day nonetheless. And hello, everybody. Hello, Joan. I'm doing well. Good to see you. How are you? I hope you're doing well. Hi, Mary Jane. Yes, I'm doing very well. Today is Earth Day, as I stated, and I worked a little bit on some projects that I have going. My my fancy napkin rings arrived today, so that was fun. Hello, Jax33. Hello. I'm so very excited to do Through the Looking Glass because most of the time when the adventures of Alice in Wonderland, that sort of is where people stop. And I myself, I've never read Through the Looking Glass, so it will be a first for me too. And I'm so glad that you are here to share that moment with me. So thank you very much for being here. I'm so excited. And like I said, I'm not wearing my jacket and I'm not wearing any jewelry. I'm not even wearing my ring because perhaps I was lazy. We'll just give everyone just a couple of moments. Let me see. I've got a couple of messages here. I don't know if it's audio related or if it's just oh yes, no, just people saying hello, and that is perfectly fine. Scotty Dahati, hello, good to have you here, my friend. So anyway, my loves, welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I am your host, yours truly, Richard Lale, which is one name, not two. And if I were just Richard, I'd be a dick. Anyway, my loves, without further ado, I think we're all sort of relaxed and all ready to have story time. And if not, you can catch it on the playback. But I hope you're all comfortable. I hope you're having a good evening tonight. And now, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, and those who are somewhere in between, Through the Looking Glass. And what Alice found there. Chapter 1. Hi, Crazy. Yes, that's his works. Hello. Okay, Chapter 1. Looking Glass House. One thing was certain, that the white kitten had nothing to do with it. It was the black kitten's fault entirely, for the white kitten had been having its face washed by the old cat for the last quarter of an hour, and bearing it pretty well considering. So you see that it couldn't have had any hand in the mischief. The way Dinah washed her children's faces was this. First, she held the poor thing down by its ear with one paw, and then, with the other paw, she rubbed its face all over, the wrong way, beginning at its nose, and just now, as I said, she was hard at work on the white kitten, which was lying quite still and trying to purr, no doubt feeling it was all meant for its good. But the black kitten had been finished with earlier in the afternoon, and so, while Alice was sitting curled up in a corner of the great armchair, half talking to herself and half asleep, the kitten had been having a grand game of romps with a ball of worsted Alice had been trying to wind up, and had been rolling it up and down till it had come undone again. And there it was, spread over the hearthrug, all knots and tangles, with the kitten running after its own tail in the middle. "Oh, you wicked little thing!" cried Alice, catching up the kitten and giving a little kiss to make it understand that it was in disgrace. "Really, Dinah ought to have taught you better manners. You ought, Dinah. You know you ought," she added, looking reproachfully at the old cat, and speaking in as cross a voice as she could manage. And then she scrambled back into the armchair, taking the kitten and the worsted with her, and began winding up the ball again. But she didn't get on very fast, as she was talking all the time, sometimes to the kitten and sometimes to herself. Kitty sat very demurely on her knee, pretending to watch the progress of the winding, and now and then putting out one paw and gently touching the ball, as if it would be glad to help if it might. "Do you know what tomorrow is, Kitty?" Alice began. "You would have guessed if you'd been up in the window with me, only Dinah was making you tidy so you couldn't. I was watching the boys getting in sticks for a bonfire, and it wants plenty of sticks. Kitty, only it got so cold and snowed so, I had to leave off. Never mind, Kitty. We'll go and see the bonfire tomorrow." Here Alice wound 2 or 3 turns of the worsted round the kitten's neck, just to see how it would look. This led to a scramble in which the ball rolled down upon the floor, and the yards and yards of it got unwound again. Good evening, Lauren. "Do you know, I was so angry, Kitty," Alice went on as soon as they were comfortably settled again. "When I saw all the mischief you had been doing, I was very nearly opening the window and putting you out into the snow, and you'd have deserved it. You little mischievous darling. What have you got to say for yourself? Now don't interrupt me," she went on, holding up one finger. I'm going to tell you all your faults. Number one, you squeaked twice while Dinah was washing your face this morning. Now you can't deny it. Kitty, I heard you. What's that you say? Pretending that the kitten was squeaking. Her paw went into your eye. Well, that's your fault for keeping your eyes open. If you'd shut them tight up, it wouldn't have happened. Now, don't make any more excuses, but listen. Number two, you pulled Snowdrop away by the tail, just as I had put down the saucer of milk before her. What, you were thirsty, were you? How do you know she wasn't thirsty too? Now for number three, you unwound every bit of the worsted while I wasn't looking. That's 3 faults, Kitty, and you've not been punished for any of them yet. You know I'm saving up all your punishments for Wednesday week. Suppose they had saved up all my punishments, she went on, talking more to herself than to the kitten. What would they do at the end of a year? I should be sent to prison, I suppose. When the day came, or let me see, suppose each punishment was to be going without a dinner, then when the miserable day came, I should have to go without 50 dinners at once. Well, I shouldn't mind that much. I'd far rather go without them than eat them. Do you hear the snow against the window panes, Kitty? How nice and soft it sounds. just as if one was kissing the windows all over outside. I wonder if the snow loves the trees and fields that it kisses them so gently. And then it covers them up snug, with a white quilt, and perhaps it says, "Go to sleep, darlings, till the summer comes again." And when they wake up in the summer, Kitty, they dress themselves all in green and dance about whenever the wind blows. "Oh, that's very pretty," cried Alice, dropping the ball of worsted to clap her hands. "And I do so wish it was true. I am sure the woods look sleepy in the autumn when the leaves are getting brown." "Kitty, can you play chess? Now don't smile, my dear. I'm asking it seriously, because when we were playing just now, you watched just as if you understood it, and when I said check, you purred. Well, it was a nice check, Kitty, and really I might have won if it hadn't been for that nasty knight that came wiggling down among my pieces, Kitty dear. Let's pretend." And here I wish I could tell you half the things Alice used to say, beginning with her favorite phrase, "Let's pretend." She had quite a long argument with her sister only the day before, all because Alice had begun with, "Let's pretend we're kings and queens." And her sister, who liked being very exact, had argued that they couldn't because there were only two of them, and Alice had been reduced at last to say, "Well, you can be one of them then, and I'll be all the rest." And once she had really frightened her old nurse by shouting suddenly in her ear, "Nurse, do let's pretend that I'm a hungry hyena and you're a bone." But this is taking us away from Alice's speech to the kitten. "Let's pretend that you're the Red Queen, Kitty. Do you know, I think if you sat up and folded your arms, you'd look exactly like her. Now, do try, there's a dear." And Alice got the Red Queen off the table and set it up before the kitten as a model for it to imitate. However, the thing didn't succeed, principally, Alice said, because the kitten wouldn't fold its arms properly. So to punish it, she held it up to the looking glass, and it might see how sulky it was. "And if you're not good directly," she added, "I'll put you through into the looking glass house. How would you like that?" Now, if you'll only attend, Kitty, and not talk so much, I'll tell you what my idea is about the looking glass house. First, there's the little room you can see through the glass. That's just the same as our drawing room, only the things go the other way. I can see all of it when I get upon a chair, all but the bit behind the fireplace. Oh, I do wish I could see that bit. I want so much to know whether they've a fire in the winter. You never can tell, unless our smoke fires, and then smoke comes up in that room too, but that may only be pretense, just to make it look as if they had a fire. Well then, the books are something like our books, only the words go the wrong way. I know that because I've held one of our books to the glass, and then they hold up in the other room. How would you like to live in Looking Glass House, Kitty? I wonder if they'd give you milk in there. Perhaps Looking Glass House milk isn't good to drink, but oh, Kitty, now we can come to the passage. You can just see a little peep of the passage in Looking Glass House if you leave the door of our drawing room wide open, and it's very like our passage as far as you can see. Only it may be quite different on beyond. Oh, Kitty, how nice it would be if we could only get through into the Looking Glass House. I'm sure it's got, such beautiful things in it. Let's pretend there's a way of getting through into it. Somehow, Kitty, let's pretend the glass has got all soft like gauze, so that we can get through. Why, it's turning into a sort of a mist now. I declare, it'll be easy enough to get through. She was up on the chimney-piece while she said this, though she hardly knew how she got there, and certainly the glass was beginning to melt away, just like a bright silvery mist. In another moment, Alice was through the glass and had jumped lightly down into the looking-glass room. The very thing she did was to look whether there was a fire in the fireplace, and she was quite pleased to find that there was a real one, blazing away as brightly as the one she had left behind. So I shall be as warm here as I was in the old room, thought Alice. Warmer, in fact, because there'll be no one here to scold me away from the fire. Oh, what fun it'll be when they see me through the glass in here and can't get at me. Then she began looking about and noticed what could be seen from the old room was quite common and uninteresting, but that all the rest was different as possible. For instance, the pictures on the wall next to the fire seemed to be all alive, and the very clock on the chimney piece, you could only see the back of it in the looking glass, had got the face of the little old man gritted at her. They don't keep this room so tidy as the other, Alice thought to herself, as she noticed several of the chessmen down on the hearth among the cinders. But in another moment, with a little oh of surprise, she was down on her hands and knees watching them. The chessmen were walking about two and two. Here are the red king and queen, the Alice said in a whisper, for fear of frightening them. And there are the white king and the white queen sitting on the edge of the shovel. And here are two castles walking arm in arm. I don't think they can hear me, she went on, as she put her head down. And I'm pretty sure they can't see me. I feel somehow as if I were invisible. Here, something began squeaking on the table behind Alice, and made her turn her head just in time to see one of the white pawns roll over and begin kicking. She watched it with great curiosity to see what would happen next. It's the voice of my child, the White Queen cried out as she rushed past the king so violently that she knocked him over among the cinders. My precious Lily, my imperial kitten. And she began scrambling wildly up the side of the fender. Imperial fiddlesticks, said the king, rubbing his nose, which had been hurt by the fall. He had a right to be a little annoyed with the queen, for he was covered with ashes from head to foot. Alice was very anxious to be of use, and as the poor little Lily was nearly screaming herself into a fit, she hastily picked up the queen and sat her on the table by her side of her noisy little daughter. The queen gasped and sat down. The rapid journey through the air had quite taken away her breath, and for a minute or two she could do nothing but hug the little Lily in silence. As soon as she had recovered her breath a little, she called out to the White King, who was sitting sulkily among the ashes. Mind the volcano? What volcano? Said the king, looking up anxiously into the fire, as if he thought that was the most likely place to find one. Blew me up, panted the queen, who was still a little out of breath. Mind you come up the regular way. Don't get blown up. Alice watched the White King as he slowly struggled up from the bar to bar, till at last she said, Why, you'll be hours and hours getting to the table at that rate. I'd far better help you, hadn't I? But the king took no notice of the question. It was quite clear that he could neither hear her nor see her. So Alice picked him up very gently and lifted him across more slowly than she had lifted the queen, that she mightn't take his breath away. But before she put him on the table, she thought she might as well dust him a little. He was so covered with ashes. She said afterwards that she had never seen in all her life such a face as the king made, when he found himself held in the air by an invisible hand and being dusted. He was far too much astonished to cry out, but his eyes and mouth went on getting larger and larger and rounder, till her hand shook so with laughing that she nearly let him drop upon the floor. Oh, please don't make such faces, my dear, she cried out, quite forgetting the king couldn't hear her. You make me laugh so that I can hardly hold you, and don't keep your mouth so wide open. All the ashes will get into it. There, now I think you're tidy enough, she added, as she smoothed his hair and set him upon the table near the queen. The king immediately fell flat on his back and lay perfectly still, and Alice was a little alarmed at what she had done, and went round the room to see if she could find any water to throw over him, because, however, she could find nothing but a bottle of ink, and when she got back with it, she found he had recovered, and he and the queen were talking together in frightened whisper, so low that Alice could hardly hear what they said. The king was saying, "I assure you, my dear, I turned cold to the very ends of my whiskers." To which the queen replied, "You haven't got any whiskers." "The horror of that moment," the king went on, "I shall never, never forget." "You will, though," the queen said, "if you don't make a memorandum of it." Alice looked on with interest as the king took an enormous memorandum book out of his pocket and began writing. A sudden thought struck her, and she took hold of the end of the pencil, which came some way over his shoulder, and began writing for him. The poor king looked puzzled and unhappy, and struggled with the pencil for some time without saying anything. Alice was too strong for him, and at last he panted out, "My dear, I really must get a thinner pencil. I can't manage this one a bit. It writes all manner of things that I don't intend." "What manner of things?" said the queen, looking over the book, in which Alice had put, "The White Knight is sliding down the poker. He balances very badly." "That's not a memorandum of your feelings." There was a book lying near Alice on the table, and while she sat watching the White King, for she was still a little anxious about him, and had the ink all ready to throw over him in case he fainted again, she turned over the leaves to find some part she could read. "For it's all in some language I don't know," she said to herself. It was like this: "Iki arba abba, Seavol istilla either aber girdle stwat." It's backwards, by the way. She puzzled over this for some time, but at last the bright thought struck her. "Why, it's a looking-glass book, of course, and if I hold it up to a glass, the words will go the right way again." This was the poem that Alice read. Jabberwocky. "'Twas brilling and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All whimsy were the boar groves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the fruminous Bandersnatch." He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time to Manaxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in a fish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tugly wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, and Verpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went glumbering back. "And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O Frabish day, Calloo Calais," he chortled in his joy. "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All whimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgrabe." "It seems very pretty," she said when she had finished, "but it's rather hard to understand." You see, she didn't like to confess ever to herself that she couldn't make it out at all. "Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't exactly know what they are. However, somebody killed something, that is clear at any rate. But oh," thought Alice, suddenly jumping up, "if I don't make haste, I shall have to go back through the looking-glass before I've seen what the rest of the house is like. Let's have a look at the garden first." She was out of the room in a moment, and ran down the stairs, or, at least, it wasn't exactly running, but a new invention of hers for getting downstairs quickly and easily, as Alice said to herself. She just kept the tips of her fingers on the handrail and floated gently down without even touching the stairs with her feet. Then she floated on through the hall and would have gone straight out at the door in the same way if she hadn't caught hold of the doorpost. She was getting a little giddy with so much floating in the air and was rather glad to find herself walking again in the natural way. Chapter 2. The Garden of Live Flowers. I should see the garden far better, said Alice to herself, if I could get to the top of that hill, and there's a path that leads straight to it. At least, no, it doesn't do that. After going a few yards along the path, and turning several sharp corners, but I suppose it will at last. But how curiously it twists. It's more like a corkscrew than a path. Well, this turn goes to the hill, I suppose. No, it doesn't. This goes straight back to the house. Well then, I'll try it the other way. And she did, wandering up and down, trying to turn after turn, but always coming back to the house. Do what she would, indeed, once when she turned a corner rather more quickly than usual, she ran against it before she could stop herself. It's no use talking about it, Alice said, looking up at the house and pretending it was arguing with her. I'm not going in again yet. I know I should have to get through the looking-glass again, back into the old room, and there'd be an end of all my adventures. So, resolutely turning her back upon the house, she set out once more down the path, straight on till she got to the hill. For a few minutes all went on well, and she was just saying, I really shall do it this time, when the path gave a sudden twist and shook itself, as she described it afterwards, and the next moment she found herself actually walking in at the door. Oh, it's too bad, she cried. I never saw such a house, getting their way, never. However, there was the so there was nothing to be done but start again. This time she came upon a large flower bed with a border of daisies and a willow tree growing in the middle. Oh, Tiger Lily, said Alice, addressing herself to one that waving gracefully about in the wind, I wish you could talk. We can talk, said the Tiger Lily, when there's somebody worth talking to. Alice was so astonished that she could not speak for a minute. It quite seemed to take her breath away at length. As the Tiger Lily only went on waving about, she spoke again in a timid voice, almost in a whisper. And can all flowers talk? As well as you can, said the Tiger Lily, a great deal louder. It isn't to begin, you know, said the Rose, and I really was wondering when you'd speak, said I to myself. Her face has got some sense in it, though it's not a clever one. Still, you're the right colour, and that goes a long way. I don't care about the colour. If only her petals curled up a little more, she'd be all right. Alice didn't like being criticised, so she began asking questions. Aren't you sometimes frightened at being planted out here, with nobody to take care of you? There's the tree in the middle, said the Rose. What else is it good for? But what could it do if any danger came? Alice asked. It says bow wow, cried a daisy. That's why its branches are called bows. Didn't you know that? Cried another daisy. And here they all began shouting together, till the air seemed quite full of the little shrill voices. Silence, every one of you, cried the Tiger Lily, waving itself passionately from side to side and trembling with excitement. They know I can't get at them, it panted, bending its quivering head towards Alice, or they wouldn't dare do it. Never mind, Alice said in a soothing tone, and stooping down to the daisies, who were just beginning again, she whispered, If you don't hold out your tongues, I will pick you. There was silence in a moment, and several of the pink daisies turned white. That's right, said Tiger Lily. The daisies are worst of all. When one speaks, they all begin together, and it's enough to make one wither to hear the way they go on. How is it they can all talk so nicely? Alice said, hoping to get it much better temper by a compliment. I've been in many a garden before, but none of the flowers could talk. Put your hand down and feel the ground, said the tiger lily. Then you'll know why. Alice did so. It was very hard, she said, but I don't see what that has to do with it. In most gardens, the tiger lily said, they make the beds too soft so that the flowers are always asleep. This sounded a very good reason, and Alice was quite pleased to know it. I never thought of that before, she said. It's my opinion that you never think at all, the rose said in a rather severe tone. I never saw anybody that looked stupider, a violet said, so suddenly that Alice quite jumped, for it hadn't spoken before. Hold your tongue, cried the tiger lily, as if you ever saw anybody. You keep your head under the leaves and snore away there till you know no more what's going on in the world than if you were a bud. Are there any more people in the garden besides me? Alice said, not choosing to notice the rose's last remark. There's one other flower in the garden that can move about like you, said the rose. I wonder how you do it. You're always wondering, said Tiger Lily, but she's more bushy than you are. Is she like me? Alice asked eagerly, for the thought crossed her mind. There's another little girl in the garden somewhere. Well, she has the same awkward shape as you, the rose said, but she's redder, and her petals are shorter, I think. They're done up so close like a dahlia, said the tiger lily, not tumbled about like yours. But that's not your fault, the rose added kindly. You're beginning to fade, you know, and then one can't help one's petals getting a little untidy. Alice didn't like this idea at all, so to change the subject, she asked, Does she ever come out here? I dare say you'll see her soon, said the rose. She is one of the kind that has 9 spikes, you know. Where does she wear them? Alice asked with some curiosity. Why, all around her head, of course, the rose replied. I was wondering you hadn't got some too. I thought it was the regular rule. She's coming, cried the larkspur. I hear her footstep, thump, 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 along the gravel walk. Alice looked around eagerly and found that it was the Red Queen. She was grown a good deal, was her first remark. She had indeed. When Alice first found her in the ashes, she had been only 3 inches high, and here she was, half a head taller than Alice herself. It's the fresh air that does it, said the rose. Wonderfully fine air it is out here. I think I'll go and meet her, said Alice, for though the flowers were interesting enough, she felt that it would be far grander to have a talk with a real queen. You can't possibly do that, said the rose. I should advise you to walk the other way. This sounded nonsense to Alice, so she said nothing, but set off at once towards the red queen. To her surprise, she lost sight of her in a moment, and found herself walking in the front door again. A little provoked, she drew back, and after looking everywhere for the queen, whom she spied out at last a long way off, she thought she would try the plan this time of walking in the opposite direction. It succeeded beautifully. She had not been walking a minute before she found herself face to face with the Red Queen, and full in sight of the hill she had been so long aiming at. Where do you come from? Said the Red Queen, and where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers all the time. Alice attended to all these directions and explained, as well as she could, that she had lost her way. I don't know what you mean by your way, said the Queen. All the ways about here belong to me. But why do you come out here at all? She added in a kinder tone. Curtsy while you're thinking what to say. It saves time. Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to disbelieve it. I'll try it when I go home, she thought to herself. The next time I'm a little late for dinner. It's time for you to answer now, the Queen said, looking at her watch. Open your mouth a little wider when you speak, and always say, Your Majesty. I only wanted to see what the garden was like, Your Majesty. That's right, said the Queen, patting her on the head, which Alice didn't like at all. Though when you say garden, I've seen gardens compared with which this would be a wilderness. Alice didn't dare argue the point, but went on. And I thought I'd try and find my way on top of that hill. When you say hill, the Queen interrupted, I could show you hills in comparison with which you would call that a valley. No, I shouldn't, said Alice, surprised into contradicting her at last. A hill can't be a valley, you know. That would be nonsense. The Red Queen shook her head. You may call it nonsense if you like, she said. But I've heard nonsense, compared with which that would be as sensible as a dictionary. Alice curtsied again, as she was afraid from the Queen's tone that she was a little offended, and they walked on in silence till they got to the top of the little hill. For some minutes Alice stood without speaking, looking out in all directions over the country, and a most curious country it was. There were a number of tiny little brooks running straight across it from the side to side, and the ground between was divided up into tiny squares by a number of little green hedges that reached from brook to brook. I declare it's marked out just like a large chessboard, Alice said at last. There ought to be some men moving about somewhere, and so there are, she added in a tone of delight, and her heart began to beat quick with excitement as she went on. It's a great huge game of chess that's being played all over the world, if this is the world at all, you know. What fun it is! How I wish I was one of them. I wouldn't mind being a pawn. If only I might join. Through the course, I should like to be a queen best. She glanced rather shyly at the real Queen as she said this, but her companion only smiled pleasantly and said, That's easily managed. You could be the White Queen's pawn, if you like, as Lily's too young to play, and you're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the eighth square, you'll be a queen. Just at that moment, somehow or other, they began to run. Alice never could quite make out, in thinking it over afterwards, how it was that they began. All she remembers is that they were running hand in hand, and the Queen went so fast that it was all she could do to keep up with her. And still the Queen kept crying, Faster, faster! But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she had not breath left to say so. The most curious part of the thing was that the trees, and the other things around them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. I wonder if all things move along with us, thought poor puzzled Alice. And Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, Faster, don't try to talk. Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she would never be able to talk again. She was getting so much out of breath, and still the Queen cried, Faster, faster, and dragged her along. Are we nearly there? Alice managed to pant out at last. Nearly there, the Queen repeated. Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago, faster. And they ran on for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears, and almost blowing her hair off her head, she fancied. Now, now, cried the Queen, faster, faster. And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet, till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The Queen propped her against a tree and said kindly, You may rest a little now. Alice looked around her in great surprise. Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was. Of course it is, said the Queen. What would you have it? Well, in our country, said Alice, still panting a little, You generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep yourself in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. I'd rather not try, please, said Alice. I'm quite content to stay here, only I'm so hot and thirsty. I know what you'd like, the Queen said good-naturedly, taking a little box out of her pocket. Have a biscuit? Alice thought it would not be civil to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it as well as she could, and it was very dry, and she thought she had never been so nearly choked in all her life. While you're refreshing yourself, said the Queen, I'll just take the measurements. And she took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked in inches, and began measuring the ground and sticking the pegs in here and there. At the end of the 2 yards, she said, putting in a peg to mark the distance, I shall give you directions. Have another biscuit? No, thank you, said Alice. One's quite enough. Thirst quenched, I hope, said the Queen. Alice did not know what to say to this, but luckily the Queen did not wait for an answer, but went on. At the end of 3 yards, I shall repeat them, for fear of your forgetting them. At the end of 4, I shall say goodbye, and at the end of 5, I shall go. She had got all the pegs put in by this time, and Alice looked on with great interest as she returned to the tree, and then began slowly walking down the row. At the 2-yard peg, she faced round and said, a pawn goes 2 squares in its first move, you know, so you'll go very quickly. Through the 3rd square by railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty, but you make no remark. I didn't know I had to make one just then, Alice faltered. You should have said, it's extremely kind of you to tell me all this. However, we'll suppose that the 7th square is all forest. However, one of the knights will show you on the way, and in the 8th square we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun. Alice got up and curtsied and sat down again. And the next peg, the Queen turned again, and this time she said, speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are. She did not wait for Alice to curtsy this time, but walked on quickly to the next peg, where she turned for a moment to say goodbye, then hurried on to the last. How it happened, Alice never knew, but exactly as she came to the last peg, she was gone. Whether she vanished into the air or whether she ran quickly into the wood, and she can run very fast, thought Alice. There was no way of guessing, but she was gone, and Alice began to remember that she was a pawn, and that it would be soon time for her to move. Chapter 3. Looking-glass insects. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe in hopes of being able to see a little further. Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm the only one. But I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling about in the flowers, poking its proboscis. I'm not certain if I said that right. Proboscis into them, just as if it was a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant, as Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her breath away. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with the roofs taken off and stocks put to them. And what quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down and no, I won't go just yet, she went on, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill, and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away. And what fun it would be when they ask me, I like my walk, I shall say, oh, I like it well enough. Here came the favourite little toss of the head, only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so. I think I'll go down the other way, she said after a pause, and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get into the third square. So with this excuse, she ran down the hill and jumped over the first and the sixth little brooks. Tickets, please, the guard putting his head into the window. In a moment, everybody was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. Now then, show your ticket, child, the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice, and a great many voices all said together, like the chorus song, thought Alice. Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute. I'm afraid I haven't got one, Alice said in a frightened tone. There wasn't a ticket office where I came from, and again the chorus of voices went on. There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch. Don't make excuses, said the guard. You should have bought one from the engine driver. And once more the chorus of voices went on. The man that drives the engine, why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff. Alice thought to herself, then there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken, but to her great surprise, they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I shall, thought Alice. All the same time, the guard was looking at her, first through a telescope and through a microscope, and then through the opera glass, and at last he said, You're travelling the wrong way, and shut up the window and went away. So young a child, said the gentleman sitting opposite to her. He was dressed in white paper, ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name. A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said in a loud voice, She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet. There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers altogether, and as the rule seemed to be that they should all speak in turn, he went on with, She'll have to go back from here as luggage. Alice couldn't see who was sitting behind the beetle, but his hoarse voice spoke next. Change engines, it said, and was obliged to leave off. It sounds like a horse, Alice thought to herself, and an extremely small voice close to her ear said, You might make a joke on that, something about a horse and a horse, you know. Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, She must be labelled a lass with care, you know. And after that other voices went on. What a number of people there are in this carriage, thought Alice, saying, She must go by post, as she's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way, and so on. But the gentleman, dressed in white paper, leaned forwards and whispered in her ear, Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take a return ticket every time the train stops. Indeed, I shan't, Alice said rather impatiently. I don't belong to this railway journey at all. I was in a wood just now, and I wish I could get back. You might make a joke on that, said the little voice close to her ear. Something about, you would if you could, you know. Don't tease me so, said Alice, looking about in vain. to see where the voice came from? If you're so anxious to have a joke made, why don't you make one yourself? The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it if it would only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it hadn't come quite close to her ear. The consequence of this was that it tickled her ear very much, and quite took off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. I know you're a friend, the little voice went on, a dear friend and an old friend, and you won't hurt me, though I am an insect. What kind of insect? Alice inquired a little anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't be quite a civil question to ask. What then you don't? The little voice began, when it was drowned by a shrill scream from the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse, who had just put his head out the window, quietly drew it in and said, It's only a brook we have to jump over. Everybody seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of trains jumping at all. However, it'll take us into the fourth square. That's some comfort, she said to herself. In another moment, she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright, she caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. But the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under a tree, while the gnat, for that was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head, and fanning her with its wings. It certainly was a very large gnat, about the size of a chicken, Alice thought. Still, she couldn't feel nervous without it. After they had been talking together for so long. Then you don't like all insects, the gnat went on as quietly as if nothing had happened. I like them when they can talk, Alice said. None of them ever talk where I come from. What sort of insects do you rejoice in? Where do you come from? The gnat inquired. I don't rejoice in insects at all, Alice explained, because I'm rather afraid of them, at least the large kinds, but I can tell the names of some of them. Of course they answer to their names, the gnat remarked carelessly. I never knew them do it. What's the use of their having names, the gnat said, if they won't answer to them? No use to them, said Alice, but it's useful to people who name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all? I can't say, the gnat replied. Further on in the wood down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time. Well, there's the horse fly, Alice began, counting off the names on her fingers. All right, said the gnat. Halfway up that bush, you'll see a rocking horse fly, if you look. It's made entirely of wood and gets about by its wings, itself from a branch to branch, and swinging itself from branch to branch. What does it live on? Alice asked with great curiosity. Sap and sawdust, said the gnat. Go on with the list. Alice looked up at the rocking horse fly with great interest and made up her mind that it must have been just repainted. It looked so bright and sticky, and then she went on. And there's the dragonfly. Look on the branch above your head, said the gnat, and there you'll find a snapdragonfly. Its body is made of plum pudding, its wings of holly leaves, and its head is a raisin burning in brandy. And what does it live on? Alice asked as before. Fermently and mince pie, the gnat replied, and it makes its nest in a Christmas box. And then there's the butterfly, Alice went on, after she had taken a good look at the insect with its head on fire, and had thought to herself, I wonder if that's the reason insects are so fond of flying into candles, because they want to turn into snapdragon flies. Crawling at your feet, said the gnat. Alice drew her feet back, and, in some alarm, you may observe a bread and butter fly Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter. Its body is crust, and its head is a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Weak tea with cream in it. A new difficulty came into Alice's head. Supposing it couldn't find any, she suggested. Then it would die, of course. But that must happen very often, Alice remarked thoughtfully. It always happens, said the gnat. After this, Alice was silent for a minute or two, pondering the gnat amuse itself meanwhile by humming round and round her around her head. At last it settled and remarked, I suppose you don't want to lose your name. No, indeed, Alice said a little anxiously. And yet I don't know, the gnat went on in a careless tone. Only think how convenient it would be if you could manage to go home without it. For instance, if the governess wanted to call you for your lessons, she would call out, Come here! And there she would have to leave off because there wouldn't be any name for it for her to call. And of course, you wouldn't have to go, you know. That would never do, I'm sure, said Alice. Governesses would never think of excusing me for lessons for that. If she couldn't remember my name, she'd call me Miss, as the servants do. Well, if she said Miss, and didn't say anything more, the gnat remarked, of course you'd miss lessons. That's a joke. I wish you had made it. Why did you wish I had made it? Alice asked. It's a very bad one. But the gnat only sighed deeply, while two large tears came rolling down its cheeks. You shouldn't make jokes, Alice said, if it makes you so unhappy. Then came another of those melancholy little sighs, and this time the poor gnat really seemed to have sighed itself away, for when Alice looked up, there was nothing whatever to be seen on the twig, and as she was getting quite chilly with sitting still so long, she got up and walked on. She very soon came to an open field with a wood on the other side of it. It looked much darker than the last wood, and Alice felt a little timid about going into it. However, on the second thoughts, she made up her mind to go on, for I certainly won't go back, she thought to herself, and this was the only way to the 8th square. This must be the wood, she said thoughtfully to herself. There, where things have no names, I wonder what'll become of my name when I go in. I shouldn't like to lose it at all, because they'd have to give me another, and it would be almost certain to be an ugly one. But then the fun would be trying to find the creature that had got my old name. That's just like the advertisements, you know, when people lose dogs. Answers to the name of Dash had on brass collar. Just fancy calling everything you meet Alice, till one of them answered. Only they wouldn't answer at all, if they were wise. She was rambling on in this way when she reached the wood. It looked very cool and shady. Well, at any rate, it's a great comfort, she said as she stepped under the trees, after being so hot to get into what? She went on, rather surprised at not being able to think of the word. I mean, to get under this, you know, putting her hand on the trunk of the tree. What does it call itself, I wonder? I do believe it's got a name. Why, to be sure, it hasn't. She stood silent for a minute, thinking. Then she suddenly began again. Then it really has happened after all. And who am I? I will remember if I can. I'm determined to do it. But being determined didn't help much. And all she could say, after the great deal of puzzling, was, I know it begins with an L. Just then a fawn came wandering by. It looked at Alice with its large, gentle eyes, and didn't seem to be frightened at all. Here then, Alice said, as she held out her hand and tried to stroke it. But it only started back a little and then stood looking at her again. What do you call yourself? The fawn said at last. Such a soft, sweet voice it had. I wish I knew, thought poor Alice. She answered rather sadly, Nothing just now. Think again, it said. That won't do. Alice thought, but nothing came of it. Please, would you tell me what you call yourself? She said timidly. I think that might help a little. I'll tell you if you'll move a little further on, the fawn said. I can't remember here. So they walked on together, through the wood, Alice with her arms clasped lovingly around the soft neck of the fawn, till they came out into another open field, and here the fawn gave a sudden bound into the air and shook itself free from Alice's arms. It's a fawn! It cried out in a voice of delight, and, dear me, you're a human child! A sudden look of alarm came into its beautiful brown eyes, and in another moment it had darted away at full speed. Alice stood looking after it, almost ready to cry, with vexation at having lost her dear little fellow traveller so suddenly. However, I know my name now, she said. That's some comfort. Alice, 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 I won't forget it again. And now, which of these finger posts ought I follow, I wonder? It was not a very difficult question to answer, as there was only one road through the wood, and two finger posts both pointed along it. I'll settle it, Alice said to herself, when the road divides and they point different ways. But this did not seem likely to happen. She went on, a long way, but before the road divided, there were sure to be two finger posts pointing the same way, one marked to Tweedledum's house and the other to the house of Tweedledee. I do believe, said Alice at last, that they live in the same house. I never thought of that before. I wonder why I never thought of that before, but I can't stay there long. I'll just call them and say, how do you do, and ask them the way out of the wood, if I could only get to the 8th square before it gets dark. She wandered on, talking to herself as she went, till on turning a sharp corner, she came upon two fat little men so suddenly that she could not help starting back, but in another moment she recovered herself, feeling sure that they must be Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Chapter 4 is going to be tomorrow night, because, ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, and those who remain on the other side, there is no Scared and Alone tomorrow night. So, hi, Courtney. Hello, lovely. Hello, Nathan. So there's no Scared and Alone tonight. There is an exciting one next week, but tomorrow night we will come back and we will read another hour's worth of Through the Looking Glass. Let's see what we have here in names and messages. Let's see. That one says it's restricted, and I don't know why. Let me see. I don't know why it is. Some of them are restricted, and some of them are names that I know, and I don't know why it just says that it retracted. Maybe that's why. Hello, good evening. Veronica Story, Chuck Buck, Courtney, yes, hello. Happy Friday, happy Earth Day, Sam Zog. Hi, Sam. It's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Corey Parson, hi, Richard Lale. And have a good night. Very good. Okay, lovelies. Well, again, join me tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time for more of Alice's adventures in Through the Looking Glass. And if you are enjoying this, thank you so much. Thank you for all the likes, the comments, and the shares. All the other things, make certain if you are new, I should have done this at the beginning, but make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you know when story time and various other videos are available. And again, a great way of supporting the channel is through my Patreon, The Gentleman Psychic, patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic, or straightway through PayPal and Venmo. Those are also great ways. Anyway, my lovelies, thank you so very much for joining me tonight on this lovely Friday evening, and I shall see you tomorrow at the same bat time, same bat channel. Good night, my loves. Sweet dreams.